At 58, Carmen Silva had already learned that life doesn't always reward those who give their all, but she never imagined that a single day could completely destroy what she considered her only certainty, a son's love for his mother. She lived alone in a small apartment in Belo Horizonte, filled with silences that once brought her peace, but now only served as reminders of the absence of Felipe, her only son. Since the sudden death of her husband Roberto when the boy was just 15, she had become mother, father, support, and protective shadow. For years, she cleaned offices in the early morning hours, worked at reception in the afternoons, and put her personal life aside so that Felipe could have opportunities she never had. He was her life's project, her driving force, the reason she never allowed herself to give up. Only that day, upon waking, Carmen felt something different, a bitter premonition that tightened in her chest, as if something were about to break once and for all. That morning, as if life wanted to test her, Carmen received the news that her grandson had been born. Despite all the silences, the distance, and the subtle rejections that had been accumulating between her and Felipe, she felt a deep warmth that almost made her forget the pain of the past few years. She dressed in her light blue blouse, the one Felipe always said looked good with her dark skin, carefully styled her hair, and sprayed on a soft perfume she reserved only for special occasions. Then she boarded the bus for an 8-hour journey to São Paulo, clutching a small teddy bear she had bought with excitement in her lap. On that journey, amidst blurred landscapes and thoughts she tried to organize, Carmen kept telling herself that nothing could prevent her from meeting her first grandson. She didn't know, however, that this would be the day her heart would receive the deepest wound of her life. During the journey, Carmen tried to focus on the idea that, upon arrival, it would all be worth it. She had the childlike hope, as she herself would later describe it, that the birth of a baby would soften any distance, any coldness, any silence that had grown between her and Felipe. She remembered how he had been as a child, clinging to her waist, always seeking comfort in her embrace whenever his father's absence hurt too much. Thinking about it filled her with a mixture of pride and sadness, because she didn't understand at what point that closeness had begun to break down. Every time she tried to justify her son's distance, something inside her murmured that a mother always senses when she is being pushed out. But even so, she insisted on believing that a grandchild could open a new door. When she finally arrived in São Paulo, exhaustion seemed to have settled in every muscle, but hope kept her going. She entered the hospital, her breath quickening, as if each step were guided by years of sacrifice and unrequited love. She asked for her room in a trembling voice that the receptionist barely heard, and walked down the white corridor, her palms sweating. Carmen imagined that as soon as Felipe saw her, all the ice that had formed between them would melt, at least a little. But as she turned the corner, she found her son with an expression she didn't recognize. There was no joy, no surprise, not even the slightest gesture of tenderness a mother would expect in such a moment. Just a cold, almost defensive stare that chilled her blood before he even opened. His mouth. Felipe didn't hesitate for even 2 seconds before saying what he had prepared, as if he had rehearsed every word before she arrived. He told her that Patricia was tired, that he didn't want any unnecessary movement in the room, that it would be best if Carmen waited outside for a moment. The mother, her heart pounding, tried to smile, trying to convince herself that it wasn't personal, that perhaps it was just the stress of childbirth. But the way he avoided looking directly at her, the way he kept his arms crossed, as if he were defending himself against his own mother, set off a fire in her chest. Carmen had felt that feeling before, when he stopped answering messages, when the calls became brief and distant, when he seemed afraid that her presence would disrupt the new family he was trying to build. Even so, Carmen persisted gently. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't argue. She didn't demand anything. She just wanted to see the baby, even for a second, just to confirm with her own eyes that life could still offer something sweet after so many years of sacrifice. But Felipe took a step back, as if she represented a threat. And then he said it, that Patricia didn't want outsiders at that moment. Outsiders. That phrase struck Carmen like a physical blow. She, who had given her youth, her early mornings, her health, her entire life so that he could get where he was now being described as if she were a stranger crossing a forbidden line. In that instant, for the first time, Carmen understood that something much deeper had been broken. Carmen tried to process what she had heard, but the phrase kept echoing in her head as if it had been shouted. Outsiders. It was incredible how 3 words could unravel decades of sacrifice. She didn't cry then, even though her body begged her to collapse right there in that cold hallway that smelled of disinfectant. Instead, she lowered her gaze and took a deep breath, trying not to show the open wound her own son had just inflicted. She told him she understood, even though she didn't understand anything. She told him she would wait outside, even though all she wanted was to come in. But Felipe just nodded, like someone closing a door without remorse, and went back into the room, leaving behind the hunched figure of the woman who had given him life. During the minutes that followed, which felt like hours to Carmen, she stood in the hallway, clutching her purse to her chest as if she could hold the pieces of her heart together. She heard footsteps, distant voices, the laughter of relatives celebrating births in other rooms, and each sound was a brutal reminder that she wasn't part of the most important moment in her son's life. She tried to send Felipe a message, something simple, something that wouldn't sound desperate. But he didn't reply. Not a wait. Not a, "I'm coming?" Nothing. It was as if her presence there was a problem everyone wanted to avoid. That's when Carmen felt something inside her begin to shut down. When Felipe finally left the room again, Carmen raised her head almost instinctively, as if her body still believed that a mother's love would always be enough to make room. But what she found was an even colder gaze than before. He didn't approach, didn't soften his voice, didn't show the slightest trace of emotion. He told her that Patricia was very tired, that she didn't want any visitors, that it would be best if she went back to the hotel and returned another day. Carmen felt a void in her stomach, a nausea that had nothing to do with hunger. She tried to explain that she had traveled 8 hours just for this moment, that she didn't want to bother him, that she only wanted to see him for a moment, but Felipe just shrugged as if he were talking to just anyone, not to the woman who had held him in her arms every time he was afraid of losing his father. And then, without really looking at her, he uttered the phrase that would destroy everything that remained between them. "She never liked you. Don't insist." Carmen felt her legs give way, not because of Patricia's rejection, but because her own son had chosen to repeat it without blinking, as if it were an absolute truth, as if maternal love could be measured by what a daughter-in-law approves of. At that moment, Carmen knew that nothing she said would change Felipe's mind. And yet, what hurt the most wasn't the phrase itself, but the complete lack of doubt in his voice. It was as if he truly believed she had no place there. Carmen lowered her gaze so he wouldn't see the wetness in her eyes, swallowed her tears, and nodded. Her heart, however, was already broken into too many pieces. Carmen left the hospital walking slowly, as if each step hurt more than the last. Outside, the air was cooler, but it wasn't enough to soothe the burning sensation in her chest. She leaned against a railing to keep her balance, feeling as if the world had suddenly become too big and too alien. She looked toward the entrance, waiting almost childishly for Felipe to appear, and tell her it had all been a misunderstanding, to come in, to see the baby. But no one came out. No one called her. No one looked for her. For the first time in her life, Carmen was a mother forced to witness her own abandonment. She sat on a bench near the entrance, staring out the window of the room where she knew her grandson was, even though she would never see him that day. And as she tried to process this mixture of shame, sadness, and bitter surprise, she thought of those who, like her, had once felt they gave everything and still ended up outside the life of someone they loved. If anyone reading this has made it this far, tell me where you're joining me from. Sometimes you just need to feel like you're not talking into the void. Carmen took a deep breath, closed her eyes, and gripped her purse tighter, trying to convince herself that, even though this moment hurt like an open wound, someday she would understand. When she finally decided to get up from the bench, Carmen felt her legs grow heavy, as if her whole body were made of accumulated sadness. She glanced one last time toward the hospital, trying to etch some detail into her memory that would connect her to her grandson's birth, even from afar. But there was nothing. No look, no sign, no gesture from her son that would give her any space, however small. She walked slowly to the bus stop, dragging her feet, feeling the weight of the teddy bear in her bag like a cruel reminder of a shattered dream. With every step, the thought of returning to Belo Horizonte without having held her grandson made her throat tighten. She found a cheap hotel a few blocks from the hospital, the kind of place where the walls are thin and the silence is never complete. Entering the room, she didn't care about the musty smell or the sagging mattress. Carmen was already empty inside. She left her bag on the bed and took out the small teddy bear, holding it as if it were the only thing she could offer the grandson who didn't know her. She sat on the edge of the bed, and only then, away from all eyes, did she allow the tears to fall uncontrollably. She wasn't crying just for what she had experienced that day, but for the accumulation of years in which she had given everything and received less and less. It was a silent, long, exhausting cry, the kind of cry no one hears, but that leaves a permanent mark. That night, at the hotel, Carmen barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she remembered Felipe's cold expression, as if he were dealing with a stranger and not the woman who had practically raised him alone. Between gasps, short breaths, and a pain she didn't know how to contain, Carmen understood that it was no longer a matter of misunderstandings or fleeting situations. It was a choice. Her son had chosen her outside. And although trying to comprehend this thought made her stomach churn, it also confronted her with a truth she had never wanted to accept. There had been signs for years, small things she had ignored because a mother always wants to believe that love is enough. She remembered when he moved to São Paulo and the calls were still constant, affectionate, full of plans. She remembered how they gradually dwindled, how the messages became colder, drier, more formal. She remembered the day he mentioned Patricia in passing, as if signaling that something would change, though Carmen didn't understand at the time. She remembered the times she wanted to help, offer her opinion, reach out, and he always had an excuse, was in a hurry, had a prior commitment. On the hard bed of that hotel, with the distant sound of cars passing on the avenue, Carmen felt the blow of reality. She had been pushed out long before that day. Only, until the birth of their grandson, a small hope remained. That hope had died that very day. The next day, Carmen woke up before her cell phone alarm went off. She felt as if she hadn't slept at all, as if the pain had consumed every minute of the early morning. She got up slowly, her body numb and her eyes swollen, and carefully placed her teddy bear inside her bag, with almost ritualistic care. She knew she wouldn't go back to the hospital, not after what she had been through, not after hearing her son repeat words that seemed foreign to the story they shared. She went down the hotel stairs, her heart heavier than her suitcase, and as she stepped outside, she felt a strange mixture of relief and defeat, relief at leaving a place that had hurt her so deeply, and defeat at leaving without having met the baby she had been waiting for with such longing. The walk back to the bus station was slow. Carmen walked with her head down, avoiding passing happy people, families together, or excited couples entering the hospital. Each of those scenes caught her breath for a moment. When she finally reached the terminal, she bought the ticket without a second thought, as if she feared that staying a minute longer might worsen the pain. While waiting for the bus, she observed the people around her. Mothers comforting young children, couples arguing over trivial matters, elderly people poring over crumpled documents, and there, sitting on a cold metal bench, Carmen felt something she had never felt so intensely, the absolute certainty that she was alone. Not for lack of people in the world, but because the only person she had lived for her entire life no longer saw her as family. When she finally boarded the bus back to Belo Horizonte, Carmen chose a seat near the window, as she always did when she needed to escape the world for a while. The movement of the vehicle made her dizzy, but it was a different kind of dizziness, mixed with anguish and emotional exhaustion. She watched the landscape pass by without really seeing it, while mentally reviewing every decision she had made since Felipe was born. She wondered when she had lost her son, what she had done wrong, if she had been too present, too devoted, too available. Sometimes grief makes you look for faults where there are none, and Carmen, with her wounded heart, was no exception. She tried to find a logical explanation, but nothing made sense. The only thing that was clear was that she was returning empty-handed and with a broken soul. Halfway there, the bus stopped at a rest stop so passengers could stretch their legs. Carmen got off slowly, feeling a trembling in her legs that had nothing to do with the journey. She walked to a small shop and bought a bottle of water, more to have something to hold than out of thirst. While she waited outside, she saw a young woman hug her mother enthusiastically before boarding another bus. She couldn't help but watch them, feeling a pang so deep she had to look away. It wasn't envy, it was grief. Grief for a maternal love she had always taken for granted. Grief for a son who no longer recognized her as an essential part of his story. Carmen returned to her seat in an even heavier silence, as if the journey were growing longer with every kilometer. When the bus finally arrived in Belo Horizonte, the day was already drawing to a close. The city lights illuminated the streets, but to Carmen, everything seemed dimmer, as if the world had lost some of its color. She walked slowly home, dragging her feet, feeling that each step took her a little further from the hope she had carried with her when she left the previous morning. Opening the door, the silence greeted her like a sharp blow. Before, these silences had been a kind of respite after years of hard work. Now they were a constant reminder that she lived alone, that there was no one left waiting for her. She placed her keys on the table, propped her purse on a chair, and stood in the middle of the living room, unsure what to do with such emptiness. She sat on the sofa, still wearing her coat, unable to move. She looked at the teddy bear she had bought for her grandson, the tag still attached, and felt her heart clench in her chest. She didn't know whether to keep it, give it away, or simply leave it there, a painful symbol of something that never came to pass. The tears returned, silent, hot, inevitable. But this time she wasn't crying just because of the rejection, but because of the accumulation of years spent maintaining a relationship that had ceased to exist long before she realized it. Carmen knew that this moment, this return to a house that felt too still, would be the beginning of a new chapter, though she had no idea how to face it or where to find the strength to carry on. All she knew was that, for the first time in her life, she didn't have a clear place in her own son's life. Carmen stood motionless for a long time, observing the living room as if it were a new place, even though she had lived there for years. Everything seemed different, smaller, emptier. She got up and went to the kitchen, opened the refrigerator door without thinking, and immediately closed it again, as if that automatic gesture were a way to distract herself from the pain. She walked down the hallway, running her fingers along the walls she herself had painted, so that Felipe could grow up in a decent home. Every detail reminded her of another time, the impromptu birthday parties, the shared laughter, the study nights where she would sit close to keep him company. It was strange to feel that those memories belonged to another life, to another Carmen who no longer existed. The current version of herself was broken in places she didn't know how to mend. That night, before trying to sleep, Carmen looked at herself in the bathroom mirror. She wasn't looking for beauty or youth. She was looking to recognize something of herself behind the puffy eyes and tired face. But what she saw was a woman who had lived for others for too long, believing that self-sacrificing love would always be rewarded. She leaned against the sink, closed her eyes, and took a deep breath, trying to find some spark of strength within herself. She didn't find it. She only saw a mother who had lost the place she thought was eternal. She turned off the bathroom light and walked back to the bedroom, knowing that sleep wouldn't be easy, but that facing that silence was inevitable. It was the first night in her entire life that Carmen felt completely alone. The next morning, Carmen woke with burning eyes and a feeling that her chest weighed more than her entire body. She sat up weakly in bed and looked around, noticing how quiet the house was. Before, that silence had been a welcome respite after years of hard work. Now it was something else entirely. A constant reminder that the only person she had lived for her entire life no longer saw her as part of his. She walked to the kitchen, made a cup of coffee that she barely tasted, and leaned against the table, her gaze unfocused, feeling that even the simplest tasks had lost their meaning. It was as if the day before had ripped a part of her away that would never grow back. In an almost automatic impulse, Carmen picked up her phone and opened the forum where she usually read stories from other people going through difficult situations. She wasn't going to write anything at first. She just wanted to know she wasn't the only one experiencing such pain. But as she scrolled through the posts, she felt a sudden need to vent. And if you, who are reading this now, have made it this far, leave me a comment or share where you're joining me from. Sometimes a story like this can help someone who also feels invisible. Carmen took a deep breath after writing those words, as if releasing them had unloaded a weight she'd been carrying since the hospital corridor. For the first time since her grandson's birth, she felt a small relief in her chest, a kind of respite amidst so much pain. After posting her message, Carmen put her phone aside and allowed herself to breathe. A little more calmly. She wasn't expecting immediate replies or seeking instant comfort. She just needed to feel less alone. She walked to the living room and opened the curtains, letting the morning light slowly in. The brightness revealed the state of her house. Tidy, clean, quiet. Too quiet. Despite the pain, something inside her began to accept a truth she had rejected until that moment. Felipe had gone his own way, and that path didn't include her. It wasn't fair, it wasn't logical, it didn't make up for anything she had done, but it was the reality, And although it was still an open wound, for the first time, Carmen felt that perhaps, just perhaps, it was time to start living for herself. She sat on the sofa and picked up the teddy bear again. She looked at it for a few seconds, running her fingers over the soft fabric, and instead of feeling that painful pang that had pierced her since the hospital, this time she felt something different, a quiet affection without expectation. She put the toy away in a box, not as a symbol of defeat, but as a reminder that she had loved completely, sincerely, and deeply. No one could take that away from her. No one could say she wasn't a good mother. No one could erase the years she had dedicated herself to giving Felipe a future. That thought, small, timid, fragile, gave her a little strength, enough to stand up and take a deep breath, trying to imagine what a life that didn't revolve around her son would be like. Carmen spent the rest of the afternoon tidying up small corners of the house, not out of obligation, but because she needed to move her hands so her mind wouldn't get stuck in memories. While putting away some things, she found a photo of Felipe as a child, hugging her with a smile so big it almost didn't fit on his face. For a second, the image disarmed her. She felt the pang of nostalgia press against her chest, but she didn't cry. Instead, she placed the photo in a frame on the shelf as a reminder that this love existed, that it was real, even though it was so far away now. She didn't want to erase their history. She wanted to learn to live with what remained of it. As the sun began to set, Carmen sat by the window and watched the sky turn orange. For the first time since the trip, she didn't feel that mixture of anguish and despair. What she felt was a different kind of silence, less aggressive, as if something inside her were beginning to organize itself. She had no plan. She didn't know how to rebuild herself. She didn't know what steps to take, but she understood something fundamental. She couldn't keep waiting for affection from the one who had chosen to walk away. She would have to learn to live for herself, even if that meant starting over at 58. And as she breathed slowly, letting the air enter without pain, Carmen made a silent decision. That day wouldn't be the end of her story, but the beginning of a new life, even if she didn't yet know how to navigate it.